A few years back, my partner and I finally did it. We bought our very first home together. It was nothing fancy, but it was ours, and the neighbors made the whole street feel warm and welcoming. Life was genuinely good. So good, in fact, that when those same neighbors decided to sell their place about a year and a half later, we couldn't pass it up. Their house was bigger, a driveway, a proper garage, even a bathtub, and it was right next door. We scooped it up immediately and listed our old place. After reviewing a stack of applications, we settled on a couple who had recently moved from Poland. They communicated with us only in English, while we spoke Dutch among ourselves, but that didn't seem strange at the time. They asked thoughtful questions about the house, exchanged a few pleasantries, and everything felt perfectly ordinary. Looking back now, I know that was just the quiet before everything fell apart. Strange things started happening before any of the truly alarming incidents. Thunderous banging at midnight. Music shaking the shared wall at bizarre hours. It never lasted long enough to feel like a pattern, just long enough to leave us unsettled, wondering who, exactly, was living a few feet away. The first real warning sign came when the husband pulled into the driveway one day with both sides of his car completely destroyed. The damage looked like he'd scraped full speed along barriers on either side. When we asked, he fumbled through two completely unrelated explanations: a concrete pillar on the left, a truck swinging wide on the right. We told ourselves it was plausible, even though it clearly wasn't. Then came the evening that changed everything. Around 6 o'clock, our neighbor rang us in a complete panic. He said two men were outside his house adjusting his security cameras. He begged us to look and call the police. We did, and he was right. Two men were breaking in through the front. Officers arrived roughly 20 minutes later. But the intruders were already gone. What we noticed afterward was strange on its own. His wife had arrived in a frenzy, sprinting inside to check on their little French bulldog. But the husband? I spotted him parking his car 3 full streets away and walking to the scene casually, as if he was deliberately keeping his vehicle out of sight from the police. I didn't put it together then. Later, reviewing the doorbell footage, we saw the two men standing outside beforehand, speaking to each other in Polish, apparently discussing which house to hit. Nothing was taken. No one was arrested. I told the responding officer it felt like a staged event. I never heard back. That break-in was strange enough on its own. But 1 week later, those same men came back, and this time, they drove a car straight through our front garden and into the neighbor's own front door. Stay with me, because what happened next involves a high-speed police chase, a man beaten beyond recognition, and a confession on our doorstep at 1 in the morning. The following week, I was at a friend's housewarming when my partner sent me a text. The music next door was deafening again. A few minutes later, his message turned into a phone call, and his voice was shaking. A car had just torn through our front garden and slammed directly into the neighbor's own front door. Two men, the same two from the week before, were frantically loading the vehicle with high-end electronics. Flat-screen televisions, professional sound equipment, expensive gear stacked and shoved in at speed. This time, police arrived in 7 minutes. Officers intercepted the men while they were still loading the car. When asked for identification, both claimed they had none. Then one of them looked the officer straight in the eye and gave my neighbor's name, his full, actual name. Here's the thing. In the 9 months our neighbor had lived next door, he had never spoken a single word of Dutch. Not once. But this man spoke Dutch fluently, with a thick Polish accent. The officers realized what was happening, and the men realized they'd been caught. They threw the car into gear. A chase tore through our quiet residential streets until police managed to box them in and make arrests. But the story wasn't over. My partner could still hear movement inside the house. Officers went back in and pulled out a third man who had been hiding inside the entire time. While we were indoors giving a statement about damage to our property, our doorbell rang. We turned around, and there he was, our actual neighbor. He was almost unrecognizable. His face was swollen and bleeding, one eye forced completely shut, his mouth torn at the corner. His arm hung at a wrong angle, covered in what appeared to be defensive wounds, the kind you get when you're trying to protect yourself from a blade. He looked feral. Desperate. Broken. The officer on scene urged him to file a report. He refused outright. Without a cooperating victim, there was nothing the police could legally do. They had no choice but to send him back to his own house. Then, late that night, he rang our bell again. He was trembling. He confessed that he'd been unfaithful to his wife and that she had hired people to have him harmed. He begged to sleep at our home. We said no. We were terrified, and we wanted absolutely no part of whatever underworld he had fallen into. My partner offered to drive him to the hospital instead. We dropped him off at 10:30, telling him we were staying somewhere else for the night because we no longer felt safe in our own home. That was a lie. We went straight home, locked every door, and sat in the dark trying to breathe. At 1 in the morning, our dog let out that low, specific growl. The one he only uses when someone is standing at the front door. We checked the camera. And there he was, back from the hospital, ringing the bell over and over. We sat in the dark watching him on the screen. And then a car turned onto the street, and everything got so much worse. We sat motionless in the dark, watching the screen as our neighbor stood on the porch ringing the bell again and again. Neither of us moved. Neither of us made a sound. Then, headlights swept across the street. A car was turning in. He panicked. He stumbled off the porch and crouched behind our cars in the driveway, pressing himself into the shadows. Watching this bloodied, beaten man hiding in the dark between our vehicles was one of the most deeply unsettling things I have ever witnessed. The car stopped. A woman stepped out. It was his wife. She walked toward her front door, paused, and looked toward our driveway. She saw him. We held our breath, bracing for violence, for screaming, for something terrible. Instead, she walked toward him slowly. As she stepped into the pale amber glow of the streetlight, she began to cry. A low, wrenching sound that carried through the empty street. He said nothing. She kept asking questions between sobs, her voice breaking, her grief spilling out into the night. Eventually, they both got into her car and drove away. We didn't see either of them for 3 days. We didn't even know where their dog was. The wife came back alone. She found the dog inside. She told us, quietly, that she didn't expect to see her husband again. Whatever it was. Debt, drugs, a marriage that had curdled into something dangerous. I made peace with the fact that I would probably never know the full truth. And honestly, I don't want to now for the second story, and it starts the way most horror does, slowly, quietly, with things that are easy to explain away. In 2017, my family moved into a split-level home in the suburbs of Montreal, me, my parents, and my younger sister. My bedroom sat at ground level, exactly between the main floor and the basement. One wall ran alongside the garage. The opposite wall held a large window that faced the backyard, covered by vertical blinds with several missing panels. Even when fully closed, there were gaps you could see through clearly. On the garage side of my room was my closet, floor-to-ceiling mirror sliding doors. This meant that no matter which direction I faced in bed, I could always see the window reflected back at me in the mirror. About a year after we moved in, when I was 15, I started hearing things at night. I used to stay up late watching videos on my tablet, since sleep never came easily. One night, with the window cracked open to catch some air, I heard shuffling outside. When I paused my video to listen, it stopped. I assumed it was background noise from what I'd been watching. When I pressed play, it started again. I looked toward the window. Nothing. A few nights later, it happened again, but this time, I also heard what I could only describe as breathing. I didn't look at the window directly. Instead, I glanced at the mirror. Something moved in the reflection. I went straight upstairs to wake my parents. My dad went outside, checked every corner of the backyard, checked the camera, and found nothing. He told me I'd been watching too many horror films and to go back to sleep. I believed him. I shouldn't have. For the next 2 years, the sounds came back every spring and disappeared every winter, always after 11 at night, shuffling, breathing, sometimes a clear silhouette in the mirror. I kept convincing myself it wasn't real. Then one night during a windstorm, my father went outside to check the yard and saw a man standing motionless just outside my bedroom window, staring in. Every few weeks, sometimes months, it would happen again. Always late. Always the same combination, shuffling footsteps, what sounded like slow, deep breathing just outside the glass. I stopped looking at the window altogether. I avoided the mirror. I turned my volume up and pointed my eyes anywhere else. It followed a pattern, arrive with the warmer months, vanish with the cold. Each spring, it would start again like clockwork. Then came a night in early December, during a heavy windstorm. I was on a video call with my boyfriend when I went to grab water around 11:30. My parents were in the living room, which was unusual, they were almost never up that late. Their expressions were tight, distracted. I asked if something was wrong. They brushed it off. As I turned to head back downstairs, I saw red and blue light pulsing through the front window. A police car was pulling into our driveway. My parents jumped to their feet as if they'd been expecting it. They rushed me to my room, telling me they'd call me if they needed me. 2 minutes later, they did call me, and this time, they told me everything. 15 or 20 minutes earlier, my dad had stepped outside during the windstorm to check that nothing had been knocked over. While scanning the yard, he noticed the light from my bedroom window catching something near the glass. He looked closer. A man was standing directly outside my window, perfectly still, staring inside. My dad shouted and moved toward him. The man turned and ran, clearing the back fence in one fluid motion, as if he'd done it dozens of times before. He disappeared through the neighboring yards without a sound. In that moment, everything I had quietly feared for 2 years became real. The police arrived, but my dad hadn't gotten a clear enough look to give a useful description. They increased patrols and advised us to install more cameras, which we did. What I still can't shake is our back neighbor's reaction. When my parents knocked on her door to warn her, she didn't open it. She shouted at them to leave, threatening to call the police herself. I've never been able to explain that. Was she living with the man my father saw? Had she spotted him before and assumed he was somehow connected to my family? Did she know who he was? I don't have answers to any of it. Now the third and final story, and I want to say up front, the most disturbing part isn't what this person did. It's how long it went on without anyone knowing, and how easily it could have continued indefinitely. It was mid-December. I was 15 years old, living in a suburban neighborhood in Alberta with my parents. My mother was pregnant with my sister, and we needed more space, so we moved into a larger house a few blocks away. Cheap, a bit rough around the edges, but full of potential. My dad put what money we had left into renovating the basement, new carpeting, fresh beams, a repaired bathroom, wallpaper I got to pick myself. That became my room. The first few months were fine. Normal. Good, even. Then one evening, we came home from celebrating my father's birthday at a restaurant to find our front door hanging wide open. My mother wanted to drive away immediately. My dad grabbed a heavy wrench from his truck and went inside to check. My mom and I called the police from the car. Officers arrived within minutes, searched the house, and found nothing, no intruder, nothing obviously stolen. But several books on my bedroom shelf had been moved. Knocked around. The police gave us an all clear and left. After that, I started hearing sounds. Strange creaking from the walls, occasional noises underneath the basement floor. I told myself it was the pipes. Old houses make noise. I believed that for months, until one night around 2 in the morning, while I was secretly playing my handheld game console under the sheets, I heard something come from directly inside the wall beside my bed. Laughter. Clear, unmistakable laughter, barely muffled, from the wall inches from where I slept. I went completely still. I lay there for 30 minutes, heart hammering, before I convinced myself it had been my exhausted imagination. I finally fell asleep. I kept hearing things over the following weeks. Nothing dramatic, just sounds I'd learned to dismiss. By the time my sister was born and moved into the basement room with me, I'd stopped questioning it entirely. One night, my parents went out for a late dinner and left me in charge. I was watching a film in the living room when I went to the kitchen for a snack. As I passed the baby monitor on the counter, I heard something come through the speaker. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Then my sister started crying. Then, faintly but unmistakably, I heard a voice say "shh," followed by a crash. I ran upstairs, grabbed my father's rifle from the cabinet, no key for the trigger lock, no ammunition, and carried it downstairs anyway, planning to bluff my way through whatever I was about to face. My only thought was getting to my sister. I opened the basement door, walked down slowly, and turned toward the crib. No one was there. But my sister was crying, and the baby monitor lay on its side on the floor. I shouted that I was armed and told whoever was there to come out. Nothing. I grabbed my sister, ran upstairs, wedged a chair under the basement door handle, and called my parents. Police arrived before my parents did. They put me and my sister in the back of the patrol car and went inside. When my parents arrived and heard everything, my father asked the officers one specific question: had they checked behind the bookshelf? The officers exchanged a look. My father went inside with them to show what he meant. The bookshelf, the one built into the wall of my basement bedroom, was pushed slightly open. Like a door, the basement window that faced the backyard was open all the way, with my desk chair positioned underneath it like a step. The bookshelf was a false front concealing a small utility space behind it, filled with pipes that ran along the walls. On the ground inside that space, food wrappers. One of our cups that had gone missing weeks ago. Lotion. A switchblade. And a partially eaten apple that was still fresh. Someone had been living inside the walls of our home, accessing that space through our window at night. And we had no idea. The police believed whoever it was had slipped out through the open window while we were all outside talking. They said it was unlikely the person would return now that the hiding spot had been found. They told us to call if anything else felt off. But the worst part, the part that still follows me, came a few days later, when I pushed open the bookshelf myself and looked around the hidden space more carefully. I found a small hole in the wall. When I looked through it, it pointed directly at my bed. My dresser. The place where I slept, got dressed, played games, did my homework, talked on the phone. Every private, ordinary moment of my teenage life. Someone had been watching all of it. I'm an adult now. I have my own apartment, my own life. My parents still live in that house. Not a week goes by that I don't think about it. Thanks for watching. If these stories stayed with you, they should. Sometimes the most frightening things aren't the ones we imagine in the dark. They're the ones we explain away, dismiss, convince ourselves aren't real. Until the day we can't anymore.